Everybody, and welcome to our Early Start research seminar focused on trauma-informed practices. It's great to see so many people coming in, but in the interest of time, we'll just make a start so that we can ensure that we're making the best use of the hour that we have together, because we're in for a real treat. I'm just going to share my screen to give an overview of the session. So I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that wherever we are in Australia, we are meeting on Aboriginal country. And today I and our presenters are here at Early Start at UOW on Dharawal country. And this country stretches from the southern Sydney in our north to Nowra in our south. We have our beautiful escarpment in the west and our ocean in the east. And I recognise the connection to land and waters and thank Aboriginal people for protecting the coastline and the ecosystems. Here at UOW, we are physically at the base of Mount Kira, an area that has always been a great place of knowledge and learning. And with that, I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people. The purpose of our Early Start Research Seminar Series is to focus on research methodologies with an early childhood perspective. We really want to recognise and celebrate the expertise that we have within our Early Start networks and encourage ourselves to think a little bit differently and outside our immediate areas of expertise. Many online today have participated in previous seminars. Perhaps you have been live to those seminars, perhaps you've viewed them through our YouTube channel. However you've accessed them and however you access this session, very big welcome to you. Today we're going to be focusing on trauma-informed practices. And to do this, we have a really impressive panel together. Judy Pickard, who is from our School of Psychology here at UOW, a clinical psychologist, and has a lot of expertise in complex mental health disorders and particularly working with parents and children. We also have Anna Judys with us, also from the School of Psychology, a clinical psychologist with experience working with young people and families and community-based approaches. And our Early Start's very own Faye Gowers, who's a very experienced early childhood educator, has a lot of experience working alongside educators and children, and is currently working on her PhD focused on trauma-informed practices. So we are in for a treat, and I can't wait to get the session started. We thought that we would organise this session a little bit differently today as to how we've done previous Early Start seminars, in that we've developed a series of questions that we think will get us all having some conversations about some really rich areas focused on trauma-informed practices. So the first question I'm going to pose to our panel is, what does trauma-informed practices mean to each of you? And Judy, I'm wondering if you might start us off.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for coming along, everyone. We met briefly a few weeks ago, and I guess I felt like we all got very excited about talking about this topic because it's obviously so important, and it's a really rich area that we all need to, I guess, think about and I guess really kind of respect the work that we're doing. I guess trauma-informed practice for me really is about ensuring that we keep the participant well-being at the heart of everything we do, and also kind of keeping in mind the well-being of any researchers that we're working with as well, because we know that from the research that trauma is actually more prevalent in our society than we definitely would like it to be. And so that really means that we can expect that we will bump into, through our work, people who have experienced trauma, whether we're targeting that area directly or not. And we need to kind of recognise the importance of the impact of trauma on an individual, recognising that it does have varying ways of impacting, and that recovery and pathways post-trauma really vary, that we may not always be expecting but need to be, I guess, prepared for. I think it's also about kind of making sure that we can recognise the signs and symptoms of trauma, in that not everyone will present in response to something that's triggered their experiences in the same way. And some might be overtly really apparent. So someone's very distressed and crying, but for others, it might mean that they've actually become quite withdrawn and clipped, and we need to be really aware of that as well. And also, I think really importantly, thinking about how we can use our research to help assist recovery more broadly for people who are affected by trauma, but certainly in the individual. And one of the things we do know is that contributing to research can be something that's actually quite healing and part of the recovery process. So that's important to me. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Judy. Anna, I'm wondering if you have some perspectives to add.
Yeah, sure. That was a really good answer, Judy. It's hard to know what to follow on with that, but I'll speak a little bit about some of my work. I guess the way that I understand and see trauma-informed practice is also about acknowledging the adversity and social injustices that many of our participants have experienced and continue to experience. I guess I also think about it in terms of how we can make research accessible and acceptable to people who may have experienced adversity, and how we might seek to avoid re-traumatization. I also think about how we can recognize resilience in some of the groups that we might interview and learn about, and support people to think about how they see themselves and how they view themselves. And as part of that, I also like to think about agency and how we provide control and agency to people who come in as participants, how we can make sure that those voices are heard, and how we can be careful around how we're representing people who might be taking part in our studies. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. And Faye?
So I'm an early childhood teacher, and the focus of my PhD research is around using trauma-informed practices to respond to behaviours that challenge within the early childhood education setting. So a little bit different to Judy and Anna. For me, trauma-informed practice is grounded in relationships. It's about connection. It's about attunement. It's about responsiveness, but all really nested within creating a strong sense of safety and security for children. Trauma-informed practice to me means being consistent, and it means being predictable. And it also means, on my behalf, making no judgments, no assumptions or conclusions about the children or their families, or even the educators that I'm working with. Trauma-informed practice, the way that I view it, is a way of being, and it's understanding how language, whether that's verbal or non-verbal, can or has the potential to trigger young children, but anybody really, I guess. But for me, my focus is 3 to 5 year olds, so preschoolers. So when you're thinking about trauma-informed practice, it's a shift from thinking about, well, what is wrong with that child, to what is happening or has happened for that child. So you have to be a little bit of a detective and work through understanding what the child is communicating that they need through their behaviour, because for me, that's where we will see it in their behaviour. And they're not just going to come out and say something generally. We will see it first in their behaviour. So you really do have to put that detective's hat on and work through what the child's trying to tell you.
Thanks, Faye. Listening to each of you speak, you've got such different perspectives and experiences that you're bringing to this central topic around trauma-informed practices. And looking at the participants who are on the screen and those who will access it later as well, we know that we bring different lenses to how we understand and how we work in the area. I'm wondering if each of you might be able to share with us some critical things from your perspective that researchers need to know or understand to be able to work effectively in this area. And Anna, I'm wondering if we might start with you this time.
Yeah, of course. I want to just follow on from what Faye was speaking about in thinking about the participant-researcher interaction as ultimately relational. And I think if I had to say 1 to 2 critical things that need to be known, being clear, being warm, and being transparent about what the expectations are for the study, helping participants to know that they have a clear choice to withdraw, when to take a break if they need to, but also that they can continue if they wish to. I guess I think about ideas like cultural safety and how we ensure that we're doing that well, and that involves consultation. And how we empower individuals and communities to take up choice and agency. So even things like how they might control recording devices, for example, or think about how they are able to review how they're being described in articles that you might publish about them, and how their words might be interpreted. Most of my research is qualitative. I work primarily with young people who've had a psychotic episode, or young people who've experienced drug and alcohol mental health problems. And what I try to do is ensure that every one of my participants has an opportunity to actually review what's likely to be published or spoken about in a public forum. So I think giving back control is an important thing to recognise and to understand if you're going to work in this way.
Thanks so much, Anna. Faye, did you want to add anything there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. I think for me, it's critical for people to understand, and Judy touched on this as well, the breadth of experience that has the potential to be traumatic for young children or for people. There's quite a narrow focus in society around what constitutes trauma. Also, the varying types of trauma. So we have acute trauma, we have complex, we also have developmental trauma, and the impacts that these can have on a child's developing brain. I think it's important to understand how the timing and duration of traumatic experiences or an experience has an impact, but also to be aware of how trauma can be expressed by young children, because, and again, Judy touched on this earlier, it's not always the kicking and screaming and the very externalizing behaviors that that everybody doesn't show those. So we do have internalizing behaviors as well that fly under the radar, and we don't often see those or recognize those people as having experiences with trauma, because outwardly they don't present what is typically known to represent trauma. So I think it's really important that we understand that breadth as well.
So important. Faye, you've picked up on a couple of Judy's points from earlier. Judy, do you want to elaborate on anything some more there?
Yeah, I think both Anna and Faye have, I guess, referred to some really interesting things that I've also thought about in terms of, I guess, firstly, Anna mentioning that it's, research is relational. And certainly when we're doing parent-child research, the parent-child relationship is all about co-regulation, and the kind of the parent is the person who's the most useful resource for a child in terms of regulating their emotions and their distress. And I think as researchers, we're also involved in that role in terms of helping a participant to regulate their distress if something has actually triggered their trauma. And so in terms of what Anna was saying, really ensuring that we create a really safe and sensitive environment that actually helps support a participant to, I guess, work with their response to what's been triggered, and potentially increase their capacity or sense of coping with what they're experiencing, rather than just assuming we need to close this down. But like Anna referred to, giving them the agency of, do they want to stop the recording? Do they want to progress or continue with what we're working on a particular day? And just not assuming that we must stop, but that we can actually make this a positive, supportive experience for someone. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. But also, as Faye was speaking about how, I guess, trauma can manifest, and just being aware of, I guess, the different signs and symptoms, and how our role is about recognizing that and then working out what that individual may need. So moving forward, what sort of resources do we need to be aware of? Do we need to spend time at the end of whatever data collection we're doing to ensure that we've provided an opportunity for them to debrief, but also communicate their needs, and then kind of moving forward in terms of what they will need after that?
You've each given us such important insights into some things to be really mindful of when we are working in this area. You've talked about the need to be relational, to be clear and warm, to talk about the safe and sensitive environment that you've got. You've also talked about the intensity of a trauma experience for a participant, and the impact may be quite different in terms of how it is that trauma is expressed. What I'd like you to each think about now is to take a step back away from, the topic of trauma, but to also think about your role as the researcher, and how is it that you prepare yourself as the researcher to enter these really complex fields of research sites. Who would like to start?
I don't mind. Unless you want to go, Faye. Look, I think preparation is very important, and I think it's good that we're talking about this. And I guess, what I think is really important in doing this kind of work is having a really good team with you. So I think support from the team that you're working with. I also think getting advice and seeking consultation is equally important. So I think a lot of the ways that I have understood myself as a researcher have been improved by understanding ideas from the lived experience co-researchers that I've been working with. So there are lots of things that I have not thought about or did not realize I was doing or not doing until I started getting into these conversations and thinking together about how I was using language, or what might be considered unsafe or feel culturally unsafe, for example. So I think getting consultation, getting advice, but also, advocating for yourself and getting support, I think, are important aspects of doing this kind of work, and being open to being challenged about yourself and your own perspective, and opening up to other perspectives that might be important to consider as well.
That's great. Thanks, Anna. Is there a particular piece of advice that has stuck with you?
A lot. So at the moment, I'm working with a team where we have some young people who are trans and gender diverse. And there were things, and we're co-designing a project. So we were thinking a bit about what we might be looking at. And there are aspects of, say, mental health support that I hadn't even thought about as being significant. For example, if you go into a mental health system, there is no option. There is male or female as the option for how you can be represented. So I think for me, it has been really eye-opening to understand the experience of potential participants in this research, but also generally understanding the perspectives and things that you wouldn't even consider without having had these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, understanding the complexity of people's lived experiences. Yeah. Thanks, Anna. Judy, how do you prepare yourself?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is some research that we have happening at the moment, which is parent-child research. But in particular, in the parent session, we use what's called the adult attachment interview, which is a semi-structured interview which asks some really in-depth questions of the parent regarding their own experiences growing up and being parented. It has a really strict protocol for it in terms of how you ask the questions and the response that the researcher can give, which is fairly minimal. And the interview is in-depth, and it's, I guess, intended to surprise the unconscious. So to get people to think about things in a way that they haven't actually thought about before. What we know, and I have a team of student researchers who are all trainee clinical psychologists working with me, and what we do know is that some really difficult things can come up, surprising at times for the participant, but also for us as researchers to kind of hear and understand. And one of the things that I guess as researchers we struggle with is, because of the strict protocol, we can't always respond in the way that we typically would as a clinician, or even just in terms of, I guess, as a human with compassion to someone. And so, because we don't interfere with the interview process. But so what we have done at the outset is we start by creating a really clear frame with the participant in letting them know what the interview will be like and what they can expect from us as in response to anything that they bring up, so they can understand that whilst we may actually be hearing them and recognising their distress, we won't interrupt the interview process unless they clearly indicate they want us to, but that we will always make time at the end of the interview to discuss anything that has come up. So I think that's an important frame in terms of letting the participant understand what to expect, and to be also, as researchers, to be actually able to feel like we can provide what we want to provide, and we've let the participant know really clearly at the beginning, so there's space for that at the end. And that tends to work, I think, for both, in terms of then the participant can speak about it more openly at the end and have a response that they would see as more therapeutic. And as researchers, it also helps us to, I guess, be more congruent with how we would usually approach someone. So it's a tricky balance of not interfering too much with the protocol, but also making sure that we provide an adequate response to any participant.
Thanks, Judy. That's fascinating. I'm wondering how you actually sort of balance that the complexity of the role of being a researcher and being a human. And I know that you have quite particular skill sets with your clinical psych background, but for somebody that didn't have that background, how would you manage that response? How would you recommend that we manage that response at the end? You know, because we may not have the skills to be able to debrief in a way that's appropriate. What sort of resources could we connect to?
Yeah, I think it's largely what we've already been speaking about in terms of ensuring that it's safe and sensitive and compassionate. And I guess ensuring that we're really aware of what that means and what that looks like in terms of what sort of environment we create for someone and how we maintain that throughout. And what are the boundaries? I think that's important, recognizing the scope of what our boundaries are. And so if we don't feel like we have those skills to be able to, I guess, provide a therapeutic response at the end, we need to be really aware of what we are going to be able to offer this person. So being aware from the beginning that, you know, what are the resources, who do we connect people with, how do we let them know that we've recognised there's a distress, and what we would recommend is following up and just being clear on those resources.
Thanks, Judy, really helpful. Faye, a different research context again, how do you prepare yourself as a researcher?
Yes, I've come at this question a little bit differently to Judy and Anna. So I've really reflected on what I do. At the moment, I'm in the full swing of intervention. So just what I do prior to going into both professional learning sessions and to my visits to services. As I've been upskilling in this area and engaging with the literature around trauma in the early years of life, I've actually naturally reflected on my own life. And this has actually raised some emotions for me to work through and actually own. And I think this is really important, because if I'm going to be non-judgmental in my work, it has to start with me. So I have to walk my talk, basically, is what I've come to really understand from my project. So in the past, I've done the best that I can do with the skills and the knowledge that I had at the time. And as those skills and knowledge have increased, I've changed the way that I interact with people, in particular my children. So you have to be open to growing. So you have to walk your talk, basically. You can't ask educators in early learning services to interact with children, young children, in that context, if I can't actually go and do it as well. So, and then put those practices in place. Prior to going into a visit or a professional learning session, I really do take care of myself. So it's very much about getting sleep. It's about eating some really healthy foods. It's about exercising. So, and for me, this is how I stay in a very regulated state when I'm going into those situations with educators who might not be so regulated because of what they're dealing with on a daily basis in the sector. So I want to mirror these really regulated states for my participants. And so what's happened for me over the last few years since I've been doing this is this is now a state of being for me. It's a way of living my life. But in the beginning, it was very intentional and very conscious practice that I had to engage in. So lots of things like, and this is what works for me, it's not going to work for everybody. So lots of breath work, meditation, a lot of self-talk, like I talk to myself, you know, our own internal dialogue that we have. And so I changed the inner critic a little bit. I use developed, or probably continue to develop, my active and my reflective listening skills when I'm engaging with educators, particularly. When I'm engaging with children, for me, this is much more natural to remain regulated. I guess I was an educator for over 20 years, so that kind of practice comes very easily for me. And I tend not to have to do too much more preparatory work around that. I kind of slip into a bit of a mode or a zone of being with children, but certainly with adults, I do have to prepare myself to be as regulated as I can be, so I can mirror that, and I can be in that relationship and, as I said, de-escalate any kind of emotive situations, because they do arise, to be honest. So that's what I sort of think about when I prepare myself as a researcher going into work with my participants, whether they be the young children or the educators.
Thanks so much, Faye. You're in a really interesting situation because you come from a really rich educator background and you're re-entering these spaces in a new way as a researcher. I'm just picking up on Judy's point before about, setting boundaries around what it is that you can and can't do. I wonder if you've got any advice for us about how you set up boundaries between your educator self and your researcher self.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've done too well around that, to be honest, Lisa. And I think part of that is because I understand my sector so much, and they're in crisis at the moment, and behaviours that challenge really eroding educators' sense of their self, sense of their identity, and their own well-being as well. So I guess for me, I want to do as much as I can to alleviate that pressure on them. But there's only so much that I can do. And so we discuss that with, if they ask me to do certain things, or do I have certain information, I'm not going to go out of my window of knowledge, to be honest, because that's risky. So I just sit with them, and if I can, I will. I'm all about kind of being that conduit of information, so I don't mind kind of going and finding something different. I guess we're looking at that whole area of self-regulation, and so that's quite a large area of research and information. So mostly it sits within my role as a researcher. Yeah, so I'm not very good about those boundaries, to be honest.
Thank you for your honesty, Faye. I'm sure there's others on the screen that sometimes struggle with that as well. I know I certainly do. It's hard to lose the educator self, researcher. Now, each of you have hinted around the sorts of data that you're collecting with your participants. Anna, you talked about being a qualitative researcher earlier. I'm wondering if each of you would be able to share a strategy or describe a strategy that you use with participants. How do you get this data from complex sites, complex lived experiences? Anna, I'll pass to you first.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's helpful to talk about an example here, but so my research is, as you said, mostly qualitative, and it spans from suicide prevention, mostly involves young people, but with psychosis or drug and alcohol, mental health concerns. So I think, like in terms of a strategy, I mean, the kind of work that I'm doing at the moment is co-production or co-design, and really what we're looking at there in terms of involving lived experience researchers in our project team is to think about things like hierarchy and power in doing that kind of work, and to think about how we can be open to other perspectives or notions on what we are researching and why we are researching it. So, for example, in one co-production team that I have at the moment, I'm working with young people who've had drug and alcohol and mental health concerns in the past. I also have other team members, someone from an external agency and someone from social work, which is very exciting. And it took time. I guess the other thing is that in doing this kind of work where you're thinking carefully about how you're doing research and what you're doing, the meeting and planning stage can take a little bit longer. but also what comes out of that, hopefully, is something that feels very collaborative. So I think collaboration is a really important aspect of doing this kind of work for me as well. So in this project, we're looking at taking up something called a photo voice methodology, which was chosen by lived experience participants to explore how we might understand recovery. And it also means that we can look at multiple approaches to what healing is and what change might look like and how that comes about. And for me, that also meant looking outside of what I might typically look at as a clinical psychologist and moving away from ideas like treatment facilities as being the only way that people recover. And so, yeah, so I've had to think a little bit differently about my work and think about professional care, but it also allows me to ask, you know, if people are in professional care, what's helpful and what isn't, and how we might engage young people in a way of telling stories that might allow it to be accessible for people who might have lower literacy or might not have an interest in writing or talking about things. So I guess in terms of a broader strategy, it's hard to give just one, Lisa. But in terms of a broad strategy, I would say that listening is a really important part of what you're trying to do, and particularly in the design stage of thinking about this kind of work. And listening carefully about what your own agendas might be and how that might be able to be something that you can collaborate with around other researchers who are hopefully involved with you, who have lived experience.
That's great. Thanks, Anna. Well done. Listening. We can all benefit from listening, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for that insight. Really, really, really rich. Judy, what have you got to tell us?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm thinking about the parent-child intervention research that I'm doing at the moment, and really whatever we've included in data collection in that study, we've really thought about the clinical utility of it. So a lot of my research and what I find is really rich is using observational research and interview research. And so we do lots of video recordings of play sessions. So the intervention is essentially an intervention using play therapy with parents as the play therapist. We coach the parents through that in working with their child. And we record those sessions, so all the play sessions, and what we use then is that in between every coaching session we do with the parent and the child, we have a session with just the parent where we'll actually review the videos with the parent as well, of helping them to actually notice what's happening in interactions, becoming aware of when their child might become dysregulated, and how we can think about together how we would actually intervene and help to, I guess, reduce the dysregulation and support the process there. So we obviously use that for our own coding purposes, but we ensure that everything we've collected, we also use clinically. So that's an example of the videos. I mentioned before that we do adult attachment interviews. We also do that as part of this therapy as well. And we use that to help us understand what the parent is bringing to their parenting. And that by doing that interview with the parent, we also work with them in terms of helping them to understand how it might influence their parenting and become more reflective of their style and what might actually be interrupting or becoming a challenge for them between them and their child. So I guess essentially, we're in the unique position of thinking about whatever we do, we're helping to use for the parent and making sure that it's clinically useful. And then we ask the parent to opt into the research.
Thanks, Judy. That's really useful. I wonder if you could explain to us a little bit more the separation between research and clinical use of the video.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So one of the things that we look at for the parent, and so the clinical utility of the video, is we help the parent, as I mentioned, to understand what their child might be experiencing. So helping the parent to mentalize the child's experience. So your child started throwing toys across the room. What do you imagine might be happening? Let's go back and watch what happened to this child just before that. So the parent starts to see the behavior unfold and understand what might have happened just before and triggered that. So we use that for their purposes. For ourselves, we can code videos in a number of different ways. So we might actually be coding, again, the regulation of the child and looking at and coding for that protocol. We may also be coding for the parent behavior, so the type of language that the parent is using with the child. And within play therapy, we code things like is the parent describing the child's behaviour? We teach them specific play therapy skills. And so we'll go through and count how often is the parent praising the child? Are they using the skills? Are they describing what the child's doing? Are they reflecting what the child's doing? So there's lots, that's one example. We'll also be able to code for things like what's called mind-mindedness, which is essentially how the parent is talking about the child, of having that about the child and to the child about their own mental agency or internal states as well. So there's lots of uses.
That's great. Thanks, Judy. Faye, what's a strategy you use?
Well, everything comes back to creating that sense of safety and security for children. And so, and really understanding that even the perception of threat can take away this sense of safety and security for children. So relationships, I've already said, are foundational, and as are the consistency and predictability. So for me, when I was collecting data in the beginning of my study, I have observational data that I collect, as well as interactional measures where I interact with the children. So what I did first was I was able to choose the order in which I did my measures, and I chose to do the observational measures first. And this allowed me just to be in the service to observe the children. So I was able to do this in a very non-threatening way. I could just sit in the environment, indoor or outdoor, and take my observations. I always tried to make sure I was down, very low, crouching or sitting. So being very aware of that power differential, that if you're standing up all of the time, that can be threatening to children. So making sure that I was very much down at their level or lower. I would always acknowledge the children if they tried to interact with me, even if they walked past me and just kind of looked at me. I'd always say hello, or most of the time they'd come up and talk to you. And so I'd always interact with them and told them the truth as to why I was there. It was really important. So I was really fortunate that I was able to do this type of data collection over consecutive, but also multiple days. So it allowed me to be in the environment to create even just a rudimentary relationship and sense of safety for those children before we got to the interactional measures, where I was asking them to come and play a game with just me, without their educators, kind of separate from the rest of the group. So that was really important, that we chose the order of the measures to allow that to happen, rather than just going straight in and expecting that children are going to come and play a game with someone who's very much a complete stranger to them. When it came to those interactional measures, if children had some emotion around wanting to come and engage with me, we would pair them up with a friend, as long as they were the same age, because obviously my measure needs same age grouping. So we would pair them up, and most often that will work for children. So it gives them that sense of security that they can come along. And I really think that's important when we're looking at self-regulation, that we want to give children the opportunity to regulate in those moments as much as they actually can. So other strategies that I've used when collecting data with children particularly is offering real choices, not having a false choice and the one that I want. So being real about that. Being flexible, so if not today, perhaps tomorrow or another day that I'm coming. To do with and not to children is really important to me. And also, and this might sound a bit bizarre, but I try and blend in. So I try and wear clothing that is similar to the educators in the environment. So if they've got a uniform that's sort of a particular colour, I'll try and make sure that I wear that as well. Like just kind of giving that whole sense of safety and security, that even children, because children are hypervigilant potentially if they've suffered trauma. And so even those cues of safety are really important to think about. I know it sounds a little odd, but when you are thinking about children who are hypervigilant, they're picking up on micro cues. So it is really important just to kind of drill down and really think about how you be in the space with young children. When it comes to educators, I didn't have to try and get my data out of my educators. I think the whole topic of behaviours that challenge and self-regulation in early childhood education at the moment is just something that people want to have a conversation around. So my interviews were quite easy to get the participants to unfold and share with me quite sensitive data around children because they were really, or are still, looking for that support and that help. So yeah, I didn't have any strategies for the educators. They were just so willing.
Thanks, Faye. And I think it is such a hot topic, and I can't begin to tell you how many emails Corella and I have fielded making sure that this session today is recorded. So I'm very aware that I've spent the last 40 minutes asking questions, and I'm really happy to keep going. But at this point, I just wanted to take a pause and check in with those who are online with us to see if anybody has a question or some point of clarification they'd like to ask at this point. Jake, I see that you've put something in the chat space. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure, I can do that. I was wondering, it isn't necessarily about being trauma informed, but many kids want to play with their carers and they want to interact with them on their level, play dolls, play trucks, whatever. A lot of adults don't find that very interesting or engaging, but they also understand that you need to play with a child and engage with a child on their own level for that healthy development and to build a healthy relationship. I was wondering what the balance to strike is between sometimes setting that boundary and telling the child, I don't want to play right now because it's not my favorite thing to do. So the child realizes that everyone has different interests and they don't always line up with what the child wants in that moment. What's the difference to strike between, I don't really feel like playing with you right now, but I will later, and managing your own disinterest to engage with the child?
Great question, Judy. I saw your eyes light up.
I guess I'd like to answer just from the work that we do. So it's a good question in terms of how to balance that, because you're right, parents aren't necessarily intellectually stimulated by their child's play, and yet their child's play is really important for the child's social emotional development. And so it is important that we still engage. The play therapy intervention that we run here is essentially we encourage the parents and train them in using child-directed play, with the idea that this is not all the play you ever do with your child or the only way you ever interact with your child, but this is a specific type of play that we use, and we encourage parents to do it at least 5 to 10 minutes per session, more days than not of the week. So, maybe 4 times. Often that's actually a big ask, and yet we really encourage, with the idea that we're encouraging the child to take the lead and for the parent to step back and follow along. So again, it's not saying that this is what you always have to do, but this is what we want to do within this given period of time. And by helping a child to develop the expectation that they will get that at least more days than not of the week, they tend to transition better into ending that play, but also accepting other forms of play or teaching from their parents as well. So I don't think there's a specific formula of how much for each, but just ensuring that it's there.
Thanks, Judy. And I'm sure Judy would be happy to discuss any of that further with you, should you want some more information there. Tama, I see you have a question in the chat space as well. Did you want to talk to that?
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful session. I've been doing my data collection from the clinics at the hospital. And for 2 months, I kind of faced quite some challenges because the participants were the patients and they weren't coming much to the hospital for their appointments. Where we were having like economic crisis, we had the earthquake, we had the very, very tough weather. So patients weren't coming and I wasn't able to recruit. I kind of wanted to see if you have any seasonal challenges and then if you try to change your strategies, or do you wait for just like to overcome these challenges and then you continue recruitment and so on? Any advice for that? Thank you.
Anna, I'm wondering if you might have some advice.
Yeah, thanks, Tamar. I think it's a really tough question because I think that this is often part of doing research, with people who'll be in our the things that we'll be interested in researching. Certainly, I've had some challenges. So one of my studies looks at family therapy and family therapy session recordings. And that's been a real challenge because I'm not only, encouraging families in a moment that is very private to them to share some of the things that they're talking about in their sessions, but I'm also relying on clinicians that are in that space to collect that data for me. So I'm not sure how to really manage some of the challenges that you're describing, but I think what's been important for me is to be working very closely with the teams in the clinics that I'm collecting my data from and making sure that they know me and they're aware of me and that I meet with them every couple of weeks to see how they're going and what they need. And I think for a lot of the clinics that I'm collecting data from, the clinicians themselves are often overworked and stressed. And so part of what I try to do there is encourage them really to think a little bit about how their engagement in the research might be nurturing for them and how I can make sure that I try and do that to help me with recruitment. I hope that answers your question, Tamar, and I don't know if Faye or Judy have anything else to add. Well, I hope that that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And likewise, Tamar, if you wanted to connect with any of us, I'm sure we'd be happy to have some more conversations. Catherine, I see that you have something in the chat space. Did you want to speak to it?
I do, and I apologise for not putting my camera on. I'm homesick today, so I'll keep the picture up. But first of all, I just want to say what a fabulous conversation, and I really value the different perspectives that each of you brought to this discussion. I think this question may be more towards Judy. However, Judy, you spoke about the work that you bring in around students, your clinical students, and a lot of the work that we lead is around where we have research teams or research assistants going into early childhood services, and often they're exposed to quite challenging practices in terms of what they're seeing children exposed to. And I'm just wondering if you'd like to reflect a little bit around how you may mitigate that vicarious trauma in preparing research teams to work in challenging environments.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I think it's a really important area for consideration. Thanks for the question. Particularly us as, academics and supervising students, I think it's something we really need to be very mindful of. So yeah, as I mentioned, I have a number of psychology students who are working on some research with me that is very much looking at the interview and observational data. And we definitely have instances where participants have raised things in the interview that has been really difficult for the students to hear. Within psychology, we kind of have an inbuilt clinical supervision sort of protocol procedure that we always provide clinical supervision to the students that we're seeing so that they can always talk about the therapy that they're doing. And I guess I've referred to that same model and used it in research so that whenever the students have a session with an individual and there are difficult things raised, that they are able to actually access me to then talk through what it is that they heard, what was difficult for them, and what follow-up needs to happen. Some of the research, because it's family orientated, it has to actually happen on the weekends. And so I've actually made myself available to students on the weekend so that they can call me afterwards. And so, for example, last Saturday, I had a phone call that was similar and just checking through that what the student had, how the student had responded was okay, and was there anything further that they needed to do. That was, relatively mild in terms of they just wanted to make sure that it was okay and could then put it down for the rest of the weekend. On other occasions, it might be actually specific content that's disturbing for them. And again, I just use the same protocol that we would use for the participant in terms of giving them the space to talk it through and thinking about what further support they may need as well.
Great, thanks, Judy.
Thanks so much, Judy. William, I see that you've asked some questions around COVID impacts. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, thanks. So, sorry. Yeah, so I'm sort of in the early stages of developing my PhD project at the moment, and I'm going to be conducting sort of some one-on-one interviews as well as some focus groups with parents of young children in southwestern Sydney. And so there's a lot of different things that we're sort of trying to consider, like the different lockdown laws that they experienced, The heavily affected areas we're looking at, they're also sort of high rates of English as a second language and coal populations. I'm trying to stay aware of these sort of aspects and try and consider those in the development of the project, and also just trying to be aware of sort of maybe parent guilt about their children's level of screen times, and how to sort of factor that in so that it's less of a focus on changing a bad behavior and more of a focus of bringing in positive behavior. And yeah, I guess I'm just sort of wondering about how to approach that in a trauma-informed way. If there's any sort of general advice.
I think you're talking to a panel, William, that have been greatly affected by COVID interruptions to their research. I'm going to pass over to Faye, who I think might have a perspective to add here.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. COVID, I think what you're talking about is the potential impacts that COVID had around parenting, and you're going to be exploring that. Is that what I got from? Yeah. When you're looking at this, is again, it's providing that space of safety to be able to talk about this, and that it's okay that we all experience some level of, let's be honest, you know, if we think about trauma, and we will often come back to adverse childhood experiences for me, where we started, and we've all been through all children now have been through an adverse childhood experience, to be honest, with the pandemic, and at varying levels. Okay, some people experienced gifts during COVID, to take something from Catherine that she talks about, but other people experience real adversity at varying levels. And I think what is really important, and I've experienced that with the educators that I'm working with, is the COVID hangover that is still happening for us in the early learning sector is real, very, very real. And I guess for me, I've just really tried to listen and really try to be understanding around what they're going through. I can't relate. I can only imagine what it's like, because I wasn't working in an early learning service at the time of COVID when it hit. So, but I can certainly be empathic and compassionate towards their experience. And I think when you understand perhaps the barriers that these people face in life generally, COVID amplified those. And I think if you come at it from a very compassionate point of view, and also having places they can go to get support for themselves ready and handy, that, you know, I know in the beginning of all of my interviews with my educators, I said we can stop at any time, you're in control, a lot of that, like what Anna and Judy have talked about, but also having some phone numbers, some websites that were on hand for them to use. I don't know whether you're doing in-person interviews or over Zoom. Mine were over Zoom because I was still minimizing visits into services. So, but I think wearing a very compassionate lens and empathic lens to start with would be very beneficial for you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I think having that toolkit of resources is so important, and that's been a central message that's come from our panel today. We've probably got time for, sorry, Anna.
I was going to say, just very quickly, it sounds like a really interesting project, William, and a great project for kind of co-production or consultation, particularly if you're looking at cultural differences. So I guess I would encourage you, even if you're not looking at a full co-production at the design stage, if you're just thinking about how you might consult with someone who has that particular cultural background around the questions that you're asking and how they might be received and what might be generative, I encourage you to seek that out.
Yeah, thank you. I think we might have some sort of community leader contacts that I think we're going to try and factor in with that. So hopefully can get that going. Yeah, thank you.
And we have another question in the chat space from Jessica. Jess, do you want to talk about that?
Thanks, Lisa. And I think this presentation has been so wonderful for thinking and hearing about the important work you're doing in trauma-informed based research. It's not an area of research that I specifically do. And so I think you've answered a lot of this already, but my question is, presumably if someone comes to a project that's not related to trauma-informed work, they don't necessarily want to come with that trauma front and centre, but they may come with the trauma because they can't leave it behind, obviously. So what are some ways that we can work in the area that we have ethics approval for and is our project, etc., but that we can do that in a trauma-informed way without making it a big deal as part of that, what we're doing?
Judy, I see your head nodding.
So did I.
Thanks. It's an important area, but I'm sure Anna and Faye could both speak equally or just as well to it. I think it's about recognising that trauma affects a lot of the population, and whilst, like you said, it's not necessarily focused on trauma, the research, people come with it anyway, and we don't know how they will be affected. And so I think it's always keeping that in mind, that it may be there for someone. And so, you know, much along the lines of what we've already spoken about in terms of just ensuring any research we conduct ensures that has participant agency, where a participant is able to opt in or opt out at any point, and not always that being really clear, obvious in terms of, you know, it's difficult for someone to opt out and then feel like they've exposed their trauma when they didn't mean to. And so I guess it's ensuring that you have practices where, you know, for example, if they're completing a survey in a room with other people, and if they decide not to continue completing, it's obvious to everyone, or they have to leave the room, it's obvious to everyone. Thinking about what alternative you'll give to them so that they can actually not draw, I guess, focus to themselves. Ensuring that, you know, as we've said 100 times today, that there are resources available so that, again, people can access it without knowing. It may be that, you know, rather than being identified, that you give them the opportunity to leave their details somewhere so that someone can contact them back, rather than it being happening at the actual where the data collection's happening. So just really kind of, I guess thinking that it's always possible, and how can we make it okay for someone to withdraw and not be obvious about it, but receive support following.
Thanks so much, Judy. Judy, Anna and Faye, what a tremendous session you've put on for us today. I think that the level of conversation and engagement from those who are online with us has just been phenomenal, and testament to the excellent insights that you've given us. By way of closing, can I be as brazen to ask each of you to give us one final piece of advice from your perspective?
I have to try and do that quickly. Look, I guess, you know, similar to what, you know, I was saying to William earlier, I do encourage you, it is my hope that all research will involve lived experience researchers from this point on and in the future. And I think that it's not as difficult as you might think to engage in that initial consultation. So although some of my projects are full co-design or co-production projects, many of them I have just simply sent my interview questions off to someone with that lived experience and asked them to review them for me. And that's something that you can include in your ethics application, and strengthens not only the experience that participants might have with your research, but I think also will include the quality of any data, improve the quality of any data that you collect. So I do encourage you to do that.
I guess mine would be that always take feedback from participants. Like it's really important to ensure that we're not defensive. You know, obviously we want to go in without doing harm. And so if a participant raised something with us, it may actually be met with, oh my God, I've done something wrong, and an urge to want to be defensive about that. If we stick to protocols, we could always come back and say, but I followed the protocol, it's okay. But really there's more to the story we need to hear. Even if we have followed the protocol and it's a, you know, well-researched, evidence-based protocol, we still need to hear about the individual experience and how it's affected each individual, and being open to that. And I think that's really important for informing our future research.
I guess for me, my last recommendation would be prepared to advocate for people, even if it will upset others. Be prepared to have those difficult conversations if you witness behaviours that cause harm.
Wow, terrific insights for us to take away. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for coming online today. It was great to have such a great captive and excited audience as well. And I'm sure that many others will view this session online in time to come. So just a reminder to everybody that Early Start Research does have a regular seminar series, and we're delighted that we'll have another one next month. And you'll be able to join Anthony McKnight and a team of researchers who will be sharing their perspectives around incorporating and respecting Aboriginal knowledge in research. So that's scheduled for the 19th of June. We'd love to see you. Please come along. And thanks for joining us today. And big thanks to Anna, Judy, and Faye.